For a model railroader in the know, when a smooth-running North American type HO scale locomotive comes into mind, one of the first names that comes to one's mind is Atlas. Their locomotives, which started with Kato-developed drive systems that were later refined by the company, really have set a new standard in how locomotives run and perform. For the longest time, the company continued to bank on this history of high-quality, well-running products, and that, of course, meant higher prices across the board. But for the most part, model railroaders didn't mind paying for it. However, this wasn't going to last forever as markets change or new markets open up, and in this case just that happened. A new market opened up for models that were less detailed, but performed just as smoothly as the Atlas locomotives. The advantages of this market were really quite simple. A lower price would allow the locomotives to be more affordable and thus be marketed toward a different part of the market that would normally have not been able to consider them, as they wouldn't be able to afford the higher prices. At the same time, the engines would also be marketable to the hardcore detail modelers that like to put details in themselves, as I mentioned earlier. This is precisely what Lifelike did with its Proto 1000 range of locomotives, which is this one is a member of. As we see, this Erie build follows that philosophy perfectly. All the pesky details, grab irons, etc. have been removed, with the exception of course, the ladders, etc., making the engine not only less expensive to produce, but also easier to handle for the novice model railroader. At the same time, the hardcore model railroaders that enjoy installing details themselves, as I have mentioned previously, would easily be able to work on these engines as all the grab iron mounting points were left in place. Atlas began to notice that this market began to eat into their territory, and so they decided to come up with their own version of this product. Atlas would call this product line Trainman, and much like the Proto 1000 models, which would eventually be made by Walters, and the Bachmann models that were out at the time, it would lack all the outside fine detailing, but would continue to have the company's very well-known bulletproof and smooth-running drive. And as we can see by this example of an RS-36, the box is a very basic design, designed to be bare bones, not fancy. Please note this is a used unit, so it has some unusual packing materials, shall we say. But this is essentially what it would look like from the package. There are in fact front and rear porch railings that are in the box and have to be installed separately. The couplers came installed. We also have the lack of side grab irons on the front nose, and as we see on the main nose itself, not really much in terms of detailing, except for the brake wheel we can see just behind the front railing itself. Some more nice little details, especially for such a low-end model, are the inclusion of the crew members and the windshield wipers. As for the rear of the unit, we note that all the grab iron mounting points are all in place, but no grab irons are actually installed, nor are they included in the box. Again, it's up to the modeler himself, or herself for that matter, to actually make these irons from scratch and drill them into position. The RS-36 itself is a curious locomotive to model under this particular line, as essentially the locomotive was a low-nose version of the RS-11. Alco released this locomotive in an effort to compete with the GP20, its second attempt. The first attempt, the 32, failed miserably. Now it was trying a locomotive at a lower price point with a noticeably lower horsepower rating. Unfortunately, this locomotive was again a flop, selling fewer than 50 locomotives. It was so similar to the RS-11 it even had the same specification number. It did have improvements, including onboard electronics that were transistorized. To get the shell off, we need to remove the two retaining screws, one each, for the couplers. This will then allow you to pull the coupler boxes out along with their couplers themselves. Once these are removed, the shell comes right off. Under the hood of the locomotive, it's Atlas as business as usual, which is not a bad thing. The robust smooth drive system from the Atlas RS-11 has been included, as well as an 8-pin decoder plug to plug in DCC decoders at the time, giving away the age of this product as being an early release. The motor, of course, doing its own best job on that as well. The trucks are more of the same, pulled directly from the RS-11 itself. They utilize the same pickup shoe, which goes over an elongated axle, which in turn allows for excellent conductivity and makes this engine an excellent runner, especially with DCC and sound. We also note the weights that are full volume, designed to take up every last space between the actual shell and the frame itself. The concept here was really quite simple: give the engine as much pulling power as possible. Again, this locomotive predated the sound equipped units. Which brings us neatly to the actual subject of this video, the DCC and sound equipped version of this, again with Loksound from the factory. As you can see, the box is once again upgraded with the gold frame around the box itself, a new trait by Atlas, and again it's considered a showcase, I should say, not a box. The locomotive is once again secured down to a plastic frame which holds it in place, allowing the railings to be installed from the factory and not needing to be installed by the end user. The box in typical Atlas style contains a blueprint for the locomotive with all the parts numbers on it in case one parts are required, as well as a note on the DCC system utilized, which is the Loksound 4.0 setup. If function 9 is pressed down, the unit might fail to operate. It just basically indicates that if you're on DCC and the unit fails to operate, to go ahead and press drive function 9 to ensure the locomotive works. The idea being that a person testing the locomotive may have forgotten to turn the feature off before it was shipped. We also get the usual Atlas warranty statement, recommending that we hang on to the actual locomotive display case, as they're calling this, in case the locomotive needs to be shipped back for warranty work. And with that, it's time to take the locomotive out of its actual display case. To do this, we simply pull the clear plastic back, which is snapped onto the actual plastic retainer the locomotive has been screwed down to, and again we employ a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the two screws. With the screws removed, we can simply lift the locomotive off its plastic retainer and take a good look at it. As you can see close up, the paint job is nicely done. The railings even have the proper multicolored painting to them, that is to say, white on the end railing sections and red on the in-mid sections, as we see. The trucks again utilize the same shoe pickup system with the elongated axles, which has made Atlas so famous for all these years, similar to what Kato has used for quite some time as well. Again, we see the front of the unit lacks most detailing, including the side grab irons that are usually on the nose, just the brake wheel mounted on the front. Still, it nonetheless looks very decent. We also see that the crew are in place, and there also is a very nice rectangular windshield with all the windshield wipers. The rear of the locomotive continues the minimalistic tradition, very Spartan, with just the grab iron mounting points in place. Again, these have to be cut and drilled into position by the modeler that purchased this model and are not available from the factory at all. To get access to the internals of the locomotive, we need to first remove once again the two retaining screws, one for each coupler, to allow us to first remove the couplers themselves and thus remove the shell from on top of the frame. As I continue to remove the couplers, I'd like to reflect on why this locomotive has a fully equipped sound system in it. Manufacturers like Walters and Bachmann have found that there is a market for a low-cost locomotive with limited sound capabilities and limited detail. An interesting note on this locomotive is that it has a fully featured sound system, not limited at all. Just getting the shell off itself once the couplers were removed proved to be a big challenge. Despite using a plastic pry tool and sponger, I was unable to get the tabs to release. I wound up actually breaking one yet again in attempting to release it. I'm not sure exactly what's causing this. I'm not sure if the factory's accidentally gluing things together. I don't know if the paint is bonding. Whatever the case, these are far more difficult to remove than normal, and I hope Atlas will look into this problem, as I'm sure there are a bunch of model railroaders out there, even with the sound-equipped versions, that would like to get them apart to perhaps upgrade the sound system in the future, or just to do maintenance. As I've demonstrated over and over again, the grease tends to go bad on everything. Even the synthetic grease does eventually go bad, just not as quickly. Finally, after far too much time spent on this simple process of getting the shell off of what should have been simple, which included me accidentally forcing the fuel tank off, I managed to finally get the locomotive separate from the shell. As we can see, there have been some changes, but not nearly as drastic as we saw in the earlier RS-11 I reviewed. The front weight is exactly the same, no modifications whatsoever. The motor is, of course, of the modern type. The decoder itself is a 21-pin Loksound select decoder, which we also notice mounted in this strange 20-degree angle, 30-degree angle, kind of strange. It also has an 8-pin decoder slot plug for an old-school 8-pin plug. Again, that's a legacy of the DCC Ready model. Finally, we come to the rear of the engine. We see that the rear weight has been shaved down noticeably to accommodate the speaker box, similar to what Atlas did on the original RS-11s when they converted those engines over for DCC and sound. One thing I must also note here is that the weight of this locomotive is noticeably less than its immediate predecessor. It's not clear if this is due to the fact that the rear weight was so drastically shaved down, or the fact that maybe the motor is lighter. Whatever the case, it just doesn't weigh as much. Nonetheless, it still performed decently in terms of pulling power, but nonetheless, I noticed not quite as good as the original predecessor of this model. Now let's see how she runs. Note the sound system was very decently loud right out of the factory. The sounds themselves, well, I won't go into all of them, but the usual ones are there. The bell, the horn, the coupler clank, which strangely enough seemed to constantly switch itself to a let-off sound, air pressure release sound for like the bell or something. Then you have function 4, which I believe is the dynamic brakes, or it's function 5. Function 6, which I believe is the headlight dimmer. Function 7 lets you switch between yard and mainline momentum, and function 9 allows you to engage the drive hold, which was mentioned earlier. I should mention function 8 is the startup shutdown sequence, depending on which you are in. Function 9 is the drive hold, which allows the locomotive to move slower than the actual speed step you're set to. This allows you to simulate going up a grade or starting a heavy train. Well, that's enough of that jabber. Let's go and give this thing a test run. We note the nice let-off effects as the engine is slowly throttled up. Please note that the locomotive is again at factory settings and using the factory momentum settings, and again it is running at mainline momentum, not switching momentum. It's so limited that I actually had no trouble switching my yard with it on these settings. I'm probably going to have to increase this in the future when I run this locomotive next. Also, for the record, I did in fact do a little break-in run with this locomotive unintentionally, as the original footage I shot for this got lost. The engine again managed to crawl well back and forth and did not hesitate at all on any of the switch points. I was very impressed, especially considering that this locomotive does not have Keep Alive on board. That's typical Atlas quality as well as Loksound quality mixed together for a very smooth package. This is in sharp contrast to some other manufacturers' locomotives I've reviewed in the past. Now let's do a little mainline running to see what this thing can do. As we hear, the locomotive responded well to the throttle inputs that I gave it, and the sound also synced in perfectly. In short, the factory back EMF from Loksound really did its job here. You'd never guess I had not spent a long time on my workbench tuning this locomotive for precise operations. Again, all that I did was basically place the engine on the track and start running it to achieve these results. And with that, let's bring her back into the yard and put her away for the night. But first I'm going to need to cut the train in two, as I do not have enough room in any of my sidings to store the train in one go. And as the RS-36 completes its switching chores, it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on this model. It's a smooth runner, and while it's not fully detailed, it still looks very decent. It's missing the grab irons, the uncoupling levels, etc. The main thing that it has that other models in its class don't have is a fully fledged sound system. Unfortunately, things start to go downhill from here because of, well, that important detail, the price. Direct from Atlas, the locomotive goes for $259.95. That's on par with the price for a fully detailed, fully equipped RS-11. So going for a locomotive that is not fully detailed is a bit of a question mark for many model railroaders. Now that said, you can probably get the locomotive much cheaper if you were to go to a hobby shop or another online retailer, etc. Bottom line, if you're an Alco aficionado like myself and you just have to have an RS-36 with sound, well, here's your answer. The sound is installed for you in the factory, and yes, all the detail parts aren't there, but you can always apply them later on. If you're looking for a fully detailed model at a better price and for more value, then you might be better off sticking with the RS-11, although with all the discounts applied by on-time retailers, you'll probably pay the same price for that model as well. Anyway, folks, that'll do it for this review. If you liked it, please feel free to subscribe, and of course hit the thumbs up on the video itself, and leave comments. Thank you again for watching, and as always, keep the metal side, which is your wheels, down on the track.